All right. Okay. So, so I guess I'll go ahead and start at like 2 minutes early. It's only 5:58. I usually start at 6, but we'll start at 5:58 today. So let me see. I sent invites out to my Patreons, so hopefully one of them will be joining me. Um, in the meantime, I guess I will preface this. So I titled this Changing Consciousness because I find that the world is getting more chaotic. And I would like to say that I see a point in time where violence is going to go away, but I don't see it. So you have to change each individual. And that's just what we're going to have to do. Um, I'm tired of this identity politics. One side blames the other side. No, everybody's responsible. Every single one of us is responsible for what happens in any part of the world. One, we allow it to happen. Two, we either promote it, or three, we're actually involved in it. So, hey, Mad Witch, what's up? That's all right. No worries. Don't worry about it. He pocket dialed me. That's all right. It was just a heavy breathing. It kind of freaked me out. That's all. But so that's what it is. So if you're in favor, if you find any justification for violence against another individual, you're part of the problem. If you think that it is okay for other people to commit violence against another person because their opinion is different, you're part of the problem. Um, we have to understand that there are people in this world who are just filled with hate and filled with rhetoric. And we have to ignore them and let them do whatever it is fuck they're going to do. And that's it. And so changing consciousness is just, it has to begin with each of us. We each have to change our own consciousness. We have to learn how to give space for those type of people and allow them to exist, because it doesn't matter what you do to them, their mindset is not going to change. And that's what you have to understand. If you punch somebody because they hate you, you haven't done anything. They're still going to hate you, but now they hate you more. And now there's actually a violence charge on top of that. Now other people view you as a violent person. Possibly you're going to go to jail. Your whole life is going to be fucked up and screwed up because you punched somebody who hates you. It hasn't changed their mind. Their mind is the same, and it will not change. However, if you allow them to have space, you listen to them and say, well, I don't agree with you because such and such and such and such. Now you've planted a seed in them where they can actually possibly rethink whatever it is that's going on in their mind. So if you are out to commit violence, you're not changing consciousness. You're perpetuating, you're solidifying their point of view. That's all you're doing. You're not helping it. You're not combating it. You think you're combating it, but you're not. It just doesn't work that way. The only way that you can change someone's opinion is by actually listening to them and talking to them. That's it. That's the only way you can do it. We have freedom of speech in this country for one very important reason: the exchange of ideas. And we need to allow that space for an exchange of ideas, no matter how stupid, no matter how hateful, no matter how biased or bigoted they are. You still have to allow them to speak. If you allow them to speak, you diffuse that. You expose them for who they are. You have an opportunity to speak with them and exchange ideas with them. and there's no violence. So let's see who's in the channel. Hey, Animist, I sent you a link. I guess I could post it in the chat. Hey, Mary, morning. How's it going? Let's see. So I emailed you the link, Animist, but I guess what I'll do is I'll just post it in here. Where it is? There it is. Copy. So again, folks, this is a hangout for my Patreon, so that's why I'm not just inviting anybody in here. So yeah, so that's the more mundane ways of changing consciousness, but I also kind of want to touch on the more subtle and non-mundane ways that we can change consciousness. Changing consciousness begins with yourself. You have to change your own consciousness first, and then you can actually influence other people. That's just the way it is. You can't. You have to really know yourself. You have to understand. I mean, if you go inside of yourself and understand yourself, that is going to give you an insight into how other human beings feel. We all want to be viewed as good people, and that is what is happening on the left. The left wants to be viewed as good people. They're standing up against racism. They're standing up against Nazis. They're the good ones. They're virtuing. They're part of that good side. Unfortunately, they're incredibly violent and destructive and intolerant and restricted. So all of they're giving in to their own shadow. That's what they're doing. They're giving in to their own shadow, thinking that they're being quote unquote virtuous and justified, and they're not. They're playing right into the hands of the alt-right. And the alt-right is just loving this because of all the anti-white sentiment that has been perpetuated. It's been giving them members left and right. Their numbers have probably never ever been greater since like probably the 1940s or 1950s. I mean, I'm just guessing. I don't know for sure. I don't have any statistics on the numbers of the people in the quote unquote alt-right, but I'm assuming that their numbers have been going up because they seem to be getting more bold, and so I'm assuming that their numbers are going up. And the reason why their numbers are going up is because they've been pushed into that. Hey, Animist, how's it going? I don't hear you. Let me see what's going on. Let me see what my speakers are. Save. Speakers. Okay. Recording. Yeah. Are you talking, Animist?
Okay. Of all the
there you are. Okay.
Of all the things I've lost, I miss my mind the most.
Yeah, really.
Okay, is that working there?
Yeah. I hear you now. I thought it was on my end. I thought I was doing something.
It takes me a minute to get things muted and switched and opened.
Oh, okay. All right, good. So how's everything going with you?
Oh, I'm progressing.
Good.
That's my standard thing these days. I'm progressing.
Yeah.
Let's see here. I love that video with Mr. Free Association dude in his car.
Yeah.
Oh my, that's a classic case. Somebody make sure he makes his counseling appointments and takes his medication.
Yeah, really.
Let's see. I think this one might actually work.
Huh?
I was looking up some quotes earlier, and then I had to go do a thing, so I wasn't able to quote mine the quote sites as much as I'd like. But Mark Twain said something interesting about and I think it applies to the exchange of ideas. When you remember that we are all mad, the mysteries disappear and life stands explained.
Mm.
You know, because no one knows when they're being the crackpot.
Right.
You don't know when you're making sense. It makes sense to you all the time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, so I just thought I'd talk. I didn't really mean to get into a political discussion, so maybe I'll step back away from that. But I did want to talk a little bit about changing consciousness and how maybe you do it within yourself, or maybe how you try to influence other people, or if you even do try to influence people, or maybe if you just what your thoughts are on changing consciousness, or what you would think it is.
You mean me personally?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, of course.
Oh,
unless you're speaking for other people nowadays.
Oh, well, I'm just making sure I got the frame of reference. Well, there's times where I try to narrate the squirrels, you know.
Okay.
Look what you got, that treat. Thank you for showing me. That's a very nice treat. They literally run up to my porch and show me what they find. So, but hang on, I lost my train of thought thinking about squirrels again. This is the ever-changing consciousness that I was talking about a couple of weeks ago. You know?
Right.
You know. So yeah, changing consciousness is something that is practically the foundation of my practice.
Okay.
We're constantly reframing the point of view, and then being part of that system. And then once you're a thank you, Kevin Smith. Once you're a part of that system, once you're a part of that consciousness, then you have perhaps some ways of helping to direct it. And so that's a little bit of the nature of what we call navigation or communion, where if you
okay, fuck this thing.
We have someone spamming the troll chat there, but okay, whatever.
Oh yeah, he says Jesus is a baby killer. Jehovah's Witnesses rape little children. Christians are extinct. The Trinity is for losers. Atheists and flat earthers can't handle reality. Yeah, okay,
I'm not sure if he's trying to. I'm not sure if he's trying to irritate us or trying to see if we'll agree. Because obviously this isn't our point of view.
Well, I don't. I mean, whatever nonsense he's spouting, it's not bothering me.
Yeah, no.
If anybody's actually physically hurt by whatever he types, let me know, and I'll kick him. Only if you're physically hurt.
I was just waiting to see if it would be anything other than random.
Sticks and stones may break my bones, but words will never hurt me.
Yeah. Shimewasa will hurt you. Yeah.
So, changing consciousness.
Yeah, changing consciousness. Yeah, mine changed a little bit there for a minute, but I think
okay.
Like I said, of all the things I've lost, I miss my mind the most. That's actually Mark Twain. People ascribe that to Ozzy Osbourne a lot, but I was when I was looking that up on the internet on purpose because I wanted to open with that silly remark. It actually turns out that Mark Twain wrote that down.
Was it Mark Twain's or was it Samuel Clemens?
Same guy. Yeah, and obviously he was familiar with the concept of changing consciousness. Because, but he would go into that mode and he would become that guy. And when he did, he was brilliant. I loved it. He did a short story called, it was something like the Amazing Carnival of Crime in Calaveras County, about a guy who actually managed to sort of summon his own conscience and murder it. And so he killed his own conscience, at which point, because he wanted to be free, of restraint. And so his way of being free was to, sort of the sociopathy route. And so, okay. So as a result, hilarity ensued because it's Mark Twain. But it was one of the earliest sort of secular humanist sort of fiction stories about someone trying to get beyond morality to form their own morality, other than Nietzsche, who was an idiot. Not a fan.
Mm-hmm.
Wrong way to change your consciousness in both cases. But so, yeah, so changing consciousness, I think that happens all the time. And I think a lot of people just don't recognize it happening. They don't realize that they become part of this group when they enter the room, and that all of a sudden everything about them becomes sort of a shape fit to the group.
Right.
You know, each group has a shape, each environment has a shape. And when you go into that environment, the natural tendency is to become a part of that shape, to become part of that hive, so to speak. And people will take actions they don't realize they're taking, or didn't realize they would be taking, because they're just fitting to the shape. And a lot of industrial sociology or industrial psychology runs on that, you know, people become part of the system and they become this cog in the wheel, and they start doing things that they, you know, and this is true of religion too. People start doing things they wouldn't ever do in their personal life, or behaving in ways that they wouldn't predict from their personal thoughts. But once they become part of that group, then they start fulfilling that role. And they may not have complete control over that.
Yeah. So, yeah. So, I mean, that's interesting. So that sounds kind of like maybe an individual form of changing consciousness. What do you think about changing consciousness on a greater level, like a group consciousness or a collective consciousness?
It's easier to do peacefully within a system than outside of it. If you don't go into the garden, you can never get the plants to grow. It's going to happen however it happens, and you don't really have any control over it. All you could do is throw stones into the garden. But once you're in the garden and you're weeding and you're cultivating and you're pruning, that's when you can actually change it. And so, you know, when people follow their aggressive instincts and try to attack a system, they either have to use violence, or how to put it, they basically have to use some kind of assault on the system. Whereas someone who's working from within the system as a part of it, and I think this is part of the magic of democracy, because it gives everyone a chance to be part of the decision-making standpoint at some level. Then they can do their part to influence others, to create ripples of ideas that go through the people that are in the system with them.
Okay.
I might have drifted a bit there, but.
Yeah. I mean, I don't think there's a definite easy answer, or it's not an easy topic to really just kind of sum up. I think that, but I do believe that what is happening right now in the world, and unfortunately, I mean, I saw it happening at Berkeley, and now it's happening in other places. But I mean, people are running upon a collective projection. You know, they're collectively projecting onto other people, and thus they are becoming the enemy. And so, of course, what do you do to enemies? Oh, well, you wipe those enemies out. You destroy them. That's what you do. And that is what I see happening. And that's a very dangerous thing, because then people get into that mass mob mentality, which is a change in consciousness. So you can have somebody who's in a mob who probably day by day, you know, probably wouldn't hurt a fly. They don't care, you know.
Right. But
they go to work, they do whatever they do, and, you know, that's it. But then you put them into a mob mentality situation, and their consciousness is influenced, and suddenly they're acting and doing things they probably would not normally do, if, you know, because they kind of get lost in that crowd. And that's the dangerous aspects of it.
Yeah, it's like a version of of the bystander effect. Oh, if you're part of a group, then you only have that percentage of the group's responsibility for your own actions. You know, like those kids who were throwing rocks and bottles and stuff in that Berkeley situation that you did the video about. I'll bet in their day-to-day life, they never throw rocks and bottles at anyone.
Well,
get them with 100 others, and suddenly they only, if they've got 100 friends who are doing this, they're only admitting 1% of the blame for their action, but they're having 100 times the amount of motivation to act out.
Yeah. And I mean, there were people who were throwing explosives and bottles, you know, I mean, into a crowd. I mean, you've got to understand that there's a possibility you could actually kill someone. I mean, the one guy who I don't know if you've seen the video, but he was hit by a bike lock on the head. And I mean, it wasn't like a little tap. It was like a full, 90-degree whack on the head. And it was, I mean, the person had to have stitches and everything. I mean, he could have killed that man.
Yeah. And then he would have been sorry.
Well, yeah, he would have been sorry. Yeah, exactly. But I mean, you're killing somebody for what reason? Yeah. You're killing someone because they think differently than you. They have a different ideology from you. That's the part that really disturbs me, is we're getting to this point where we're trying to destroy our, we're trying to destroy a projection. Right. It's not real. It's that shadow within ourselves that we are trying to eliminate. And you can't eliminate the shadow by destroying it. The only way you can do it is by actually looking at it, facing it, and embracing it.
Yeah, that's why you do so much shadow work in mystical practices.
Right.
Because, attacking the shadow results in attacking everybody else around you. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and exactly. Honestly, you know what I think a lot of that process is? Hang on just a second, I'm going to clear my throat.
Sure.
Voice is a little rough today. There is a career that has been made in this country in particular out of organizing political activism for any purpose for profit, where people become professional activist organizers, and they make a living usually within the university system or within otherwise legitimate social rights movements, of deliberately trying to keep people apart, to isolate people from each other, and to create hate groups so that they can profit by it and they can become the big leader or the big influencer.
Well, I'm sorry to interrupt you, Animus, but that's an interesting theory. How would they profit from it, though?
Salaries, professional positions within an organization, accepting donations, the same way your corrupt preachers from NYS TV do. They're creating hatred and division in order to gather the gullible or the influenceable into a cult. Mm-hmm. And so they're basically creating cults they're basically cult leaders. But a lot of them do this by having positions in otherwise legitimate organizations like universities or the civil rights organizations. Mm-hmm. But in order to maintain the position and keep donations coming in, they have to have a bigger and bigger army of people who are supporting them. And as a result, you get these constant splinter groups that show up that are competing for cult members, basically. And they march them around in circles and have them shout and riot and do all kinds of things.
Right. Sorry, Animus. Let me just interrupt you for another second. Okay, but I mean, okay. So, for example, like let's say you're a preacher, or now you see TV. I can sort of understand, because they get money. They sell merchandise. They put on conferences. They get money from YouTube. So they're not raking in a lot of money, but they're raking in a little bit of money. And then your preachers in the church, they send around the collection basket, they get money. But I don't see that happening on the left side. I don't see how they're generating money? That's what I'm wondering. You know what I mean?
Yeah, usually, no, I don't want to overgeneralize this, but I've seen cases where somebody is collecting, either collecting money or holding a position in a like an administration, and that person uses their time and their position to justify their existence or justify their job or follow their own passions, whatever they're doing. And by organizing various causes, they can make themselves seem important. They make themselves seem relevant to the organization. I live in a university town, and they create weird demonstrations out of nowhere on a fairly regular basis, and get the young students to come out and demonstrate against random cause number 1 or 2 or 3. And somewhere behind that, there's a professional bureaucrat in an office who basically uses that office, which doesn't serve any other really useful purpose. They're the assistant coordinating park director of certain affairs, but they keep their job and keep their salary coming by making it look busy. And they don't really care which cause it's going to be, unless it's just some personal weird grind of theirs. But their job is to be an activist. Basically, they've created a job for themselves. But in order to keep that job and keep their salary and their benefits coming, they have to keep busy. They have to keep seeming relevant to the situation, even if they're coming up with completely ridiculous things. There was one sort of demonstration last year, and it was like international ethnic diversity. It was a demonstration for international diversity on campus. And so they got all these, lower classmen mostly, got all these young students to come out to this. And it's a major university. So there's all these people come out to this demonstration, hundreds of students, that somebody got paid to organize this demonstration. And these kids are from all over the world. And what they really care about is getting a degree and getting a job someday. But they're looking around. I actually got to see pictures of it. These kids are looking around at each other like, we seem pretty diverse here. There doesn't seem to be, you got these students coming out to talk about diversity, and they're from every country on the planet, and they don't know why they're there. They just know that it was supposed to be a good idea to show up. And so whoever organizes that kind of thing is continuing to get paid to organize. In this case, it was simply ridiculous, because they're like demonstrating for diversity on campus, and they're looking around, and there's people from 100 countries around them, and they seem to be pretty diverse.
Right.
But in some cases, people with a personal axe to grind, or are just more sociopathic about the way they pursue their issues, creates these things like your Antifa activities. Because they don't mind resorting to violence. There's an awful lot of people who find violent demonstration to be an amusing thing to do.
Right. Yeah. So, okay. Yeah. I mean, I know, for example, I've known people who work in unions who, part of what they do is they also organize. I know there are community-based organizations that make money to organize against things and organize people. There's organizer positions. You can definitely do that. And usually they're nonprofits, so they usually get, funding from the city, or maybe they get funding from nonprofit drives or whatever. I can see that, but I don't see it as a very big money-making industry. I think there's a little bit of money to be made there, but I don't really see like a single root source of it. Like some people, say that Soros is behind it, and I don't know. I don't know how much he is, or how much funding he's giving to these community organizations, and in what way, But I think that really, when I was talking about changing consciousness, I was talking about it on the individual level. So even if you did have an an organization organizing people for an event, that's one thing. But the way that they react to it, and the way that the individuals within that group react to the situation, is what I was talking about as in changing consciousness. Because you can organize around an issue, and you can create like a human chain to block somebody, or you can, sit down and get arrested, or there's all kinds of various actions you can do that are non-violent. None of it has to be violent. But I noticed that a lot of these groups are violent. They're going into a situation looking for violence. They're prepared for violence. Violence is at the forefront of their mind even before they arrived at this particular venue. I mean, you see them with shields and sticks and helmets and masks and glasses. I mean, they're going into combat. They prepared for it. They dressed for it. They're going into combat. And I see a lot of people actually supporting that. And that's what's concerning, because I feel that, unfortunately, like this lady was killed in Charlottesville, how long is it going to be until there's like 10 people who are killed, or 20 people killed, or 100 people killed?
Yeah, you're talking about basically reincarnations of the burning times, where society gets so polarized that they're fighting each other just to fight each other over whatever excuse. And
yeah, I mean, I think that the burning times is kind of a, that was kind of a, it was kind of a, I guess that's a good analogy. But yeah, I mean, I think it is definitely a repeat of something. And I think it's easy for group consciousness to fall into that destroying the enemy type of mentality. And I think that that's what it is. It's like I've talked with people on Facebook and stuff where they're advocating punching Nazis. And I'm like, you're advocating punching someone. Oh yeah, but they're Nazis. They deserve it. Why did, you know what I mean? It's like trying to break down their whole mental process of it. And no matter what, they keep justifying their actions. And yeah, you're right. It is kind of like a burning times, because those people are witches. So it's okay to burn them.
Yeah, exactly. And every society is going to have a certain number of people who are just angry people. Mm-hmm. And if you have a large enough society, you can collect an awful lot of angry people.
Yeah.
Especially given, I think some of this literally has to do with the evolution of mass communication and the internet, because it's really easy for angry people to find each other and collect each other. And they're no longer just some guy standing on his lawn shouting, "Get off my lawn, you stupid kids." Really? I mean, they're not a crank anymore. Right. Suddenly they can find 1,000 other cranks with the same axe to grind.
Right.
And then they can do the obsessive thing and get together and cause real damage. And that is a little bit of the sort of the growing pains of becoming such an interconnected society. Because, every town has its town character. Every town has its angry old man. Every little village, every village has the smart ass. But I think there's an organic evolution in place where suddenly all the angry men, all the angry old guys can get together until they, pool their resources and do something truly horrible. And they can do it because of automobiles and transportation.
Right.
They can go somewhere really far away and cause that violence there.
Right. Yeah, and I agree with you. It's like, yes, exactly. They can find others to join in. But I noticed that this form of consciousness is expanding and continuing forward. And I don't see people who usually on the left would be, reining in and saying, "Hey, whoa, hold on a second, guys. What are you doing here? We can't fight violence with violence." I actually see the opposite. That is what is so very frightening to me, because I've considered myself ever since I was young, like a democratic left liberal. you know, this is how I've identified myself, and I see, you know, quote unquote, my side not condemning it. They're actually like condoning it. They're like, oh, it's okay because those people deserve it. It's like, how can you possibly justify that? You know, that's the really frightening part.
Yeah, well, you know, and some of this has to do with, you know, we've been around a while, but yeah, it's obvious just from the function of it that you've described, and you're right, that over the last couple of decades, basically since the close of the Cold War, that the left, peacenik, anti-nuke, friendly Buddhist, whatever, you know, chill side of politics has been infiltrated by fascists. And those people, well, they're not nice people, and they will use whatever issue. I mean, you're talking about people with a self-centered sociopathic personality, and they have no problem with creating fascism in issues formerly owned by the left than they had issues formerly owned by the right. I think it's a balancing game where these folks are sort of scattering on both sides of any line and deriving whatever pleasure or benefit or salaries they can, or just, you know, out of sheer desire to see their world burn. And they'll just pick issues on either side of what used to be the line. And so what you have now is you've got a bunch, it's no longer left and right. There's a middle, and then there's a left and right extremism. And the left and right extremism are basically the same people who have just almost randomly picked and recruited for particular issues. And all the people in the middle are going, what happened to our side?
Right. Yeah.
A small businessman in, I don't know, in Vermont, who is Republican because of whatever economic policies he thinks are beneficial to business, does not agree with neo-Nazis in South Carolina driving through a crowd. He doesn't think that's right. In this, you know, in the same way that the Antifa is to you, is like, we used to have a left-right, and now you don't. You have the middle and the extremes.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And I kind of get frustrated sometimes on YouTube. I'll come across a video or something where they're talking about like how centrists need to pick a side or whatever, and I completely disagree with that. I think we need more people in the center to kind of to get both these extreme sides to calm the fuck down. You know, we need to be in that middle state of mind to kind of ground these people, because left to their own devices, they'd be like fighting dogs, you know, in the streets. I mean, it's so, for those of us who are in the center, thank you for being there. Thank you for being the voice of reason. And in the center, you know.
And I've heard that, you know, and I'm not good on popular culture because, you know, I spend more time talking to squirrels, but they're nice people. But I know I've heard that complaint repeatedly about the polarization of America and, you know, the militarization of America. And well, without getting too tinfoil hat, I think that does play into the self-interest of the power structures. If you've got a bunch of people all fighting each other in the street, none of them are doing anything about corruption in government. You know, I mean, there's a vested interest in a government to getting its people to look at each other instead of at what the government's doing. And given the other issues of, you know, civil rights and freedoms of the last 15 years or so, that it makes sense that would be in the vested interest. You know, there's a reason why the police at Berkeley and San Francisco were ordered not to get involved or intervene in that whole Antifa thing. Someone in the power structure found that to their advantage, that violence was going on, and was happy to let it play out, even if it meant citizens being harmed. I mean, I start to get a little Captain Malcolm Reynolds from Firefly on this, you know, like the government's there to get in your way.
Right.
You know?
So, okay, so let's see. So Mary Morning asks a question for you guys. I read an article recently in the New Yorker saying the U.S. is heading towards a second civil war. What are your thoughts? So what do you think about that?
I think that because, and this is the funny thing about splintering, if you've got two sides to one issue, you can have a civil war. If you have 100 splintered arguments, you can keep everybody busy. And I got to quote King James here in a minute, but if you have 100 different fanatical issues going on, you won't have a civil war. You'll have little riots. You'll have little civil unrest that amount to a football riot, like they have in many countries when when their team loses a football match, a soccer match, So if this splintering is going on, there's no one issue that can make a whole bunch of people fight a whole bunch of other people. What you got is 100 people fighting 100 people, and 100 people fighting 100 people, on 100 different issues, on 100 stupid issues, none of which will ever attain a national consciousness for more than 15 minutes, because there'll always be another one. It's like, conflict of the day, your 15 minutes of fame. And so that makes the whole population less paying attention to what their government is doing in general, or what their social leaders or religious leaders are doing in general, because they're all distracted by something else.
So, yeah, I mean, I don't think we're at that point yet. I think that I think this is more hype than anything else. I mean, the problems that we have are not that bad. They are being exacerbated by both sides. They're being exaggerated. A lot of stuff that is happening, which I really don't appreciate in the media, is they're playing all this stuff up. It's really not that bad. And again, a lot of the stuff that is happening out on the street is projection. Projection to the alt-right. For example, I did some extensive research on the alt-right and Richard Spencer, and listening to an hour-long thing on them. They're like white nationalists who are interested in an ethno state. And I think what they've done is they've accumulated people who are identifying with them, and they have their own little agendas, But for the most part, these people are idiots. I mean, I don't know how else I can describe it. I mean, they have a concept of creating some kind of a world that is completely different from what America is. I mean, America is a melting pot. It always has been a melting pot. It's been welcoming to everyone. It just doesn't fit in with what our forefathers set up. So I don't think that these people I don't think it would be possible, but that's what they're interested in. And the other side projects onto them that they're these racist Nazis, and not all of them are. So a lot of stuff that is going on is more projection than anything. So I think to have a civil war, we would have to really have this country split over some serious things. And right now, it's personality types. I mean, face it, there is no possible way that I can change anyone's opinion if somebody hates another person. It's not possible. You cannot change somebody if they just have some kind of a hateful opinion about another person. And there's always going to be people who are filled with hate for whatever reason. There's nothing we can do about it. The only thing we can do is protect people's civil liberties and their civil rights, their protection to get a home, to have happiness, to have a job, to marry whoever they want. All of the civil liberties that each individual has needs to be enforced. But if somebody hates somebody for the color of their skin, yeah, it sucks, but there's nothing we can do about it. The only thing we can hope to do is eventually they change their mind, or they, one day they'll grow old and they'll die. But yeah, I mean, there's no way we can change people directly, you know, and the violence is definitely not going to change somebody's opinion. Just because I whack you on the head with a baseball bat, it's not going to make you change your opinion about the color of my skin. You're still going to hate me, but now you're going to hate me more.
Ariamea Ellis was asking about self-segregation going on, and I have no idea what that's about. I don't know if you know that. It's a little bit of a sidebar, but it may be relevant to the whole splintering issue.
Well, self-segregation, it sounds to me like is meant by you already kind of like voluntarily move with other people who you feel are your kind. Like there's been some people who have been asking for like a black state, you know, or segregation of schools. Like they don't want to have white students at schools, or they want to have like a safe space where there's no other any other people there except people of color. So I think that's might be what she's talking about. But again, it's segregation. I don't care if it's forced segregation or self-imposed segregation.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure.
We still have to interact with other people. And if we segregate ourselves, we're prolonging the inevitable, you know?
Yeah, well, somebody who's good at creating memes and organizations and recruiting followers it sounds like they're creating an echo chamber where they just want to create a little cult box so that their followers don't get away from them. Kind of like the fundamentalists have done with the internet. You know, you got your loyal followers of, you know, NYS TV who watch all of their programs and spend all of their time listening to those things. And so as a result, they're a safe recruit. They're a safe foot soldier. And that's what I'm saying. Somewhere, this stuff doesn't happen entirely by accident. Somebody is encouraging this. And you know, the rule is follow the money.
Right.
So somebody is creating a career for themselves out of creating splinters. And it is a sufficiently widespread phenomenon that I think that it is a known tactic that people do. Mm-hmm. So, and once some of these sort of clever sociopathic people see that you can make a career out of hatred, I mean, which is a common enough career in human history, but once they see that you can do that, they just have to find their spot. Mm-hmm. They just have to find somewhere, some territory someone's not already taken up, and then they start their little echo box around that. In the same way that, you know, in a way, we've got a little bit of an echo box here because this is a, you know, pagan chat, pagan community, and we watch similar videos and talk to each other about it. It's just we're not trying to hurt people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I agree with you. Yeah, you're going to fall into that category of an echo chamber because chances are people who have similar ideas are probably going to flock towards you, and you're also going to flock towards other people who have similar ideas also. So yeah, I agree with you. I think to a certain extent, echo chambers are inevitable.
Yeah, and maybe in the long run, I think in the long run of the internet society, they will all become more organically interactive. Mm-hmm. But in the early days, you're going to have these little vortexes, these little tornadoes, these little storm cells that form, that built out of previous experience or previous issues. And it's kind of like the way, I don't want to get too weird, but, you know, every drop of water in a cloud formed around a dust particle. You know, it drew what it drew. And the trick is not to have it set off, you know, a huge storm across the entire landscape, but to get it to flow with the wind. I've just gone too far. Sorry, I wandered off into physics again.
Yeah, that's all right. So, I mean, I think that coming back to the topic at hand of changing consciousness, I think the most important thing, the most important thing that we need to do at this time, change consciousness, is to change consciousness of those, first of all, of ourselves, and then those around us. And just when people seem to be justifying violence, or let me put it this way. I think introspection is really good to just kind of find out exactly where we are and what we believe, and then to reinforce those beliefs. And I think we're also going to have to be willing to challenge other people on an intellectual level. I think we're just going to have those old school exchange of ideas. And that's just what we're going to have to do, so that we can find out that these horrible, horrible, evil people that we project onto are not all that awful, horrible people. They actually just have a lot of fears and concerns, and we can listen to them. Because, I mean, we've heard it all from Star Wars and everywhere else. Fear leads to hate, So anybody who hates, at the heart of it, there's fear. And right now, we're not listening to that fear. We're just seeing that hatred, And so I think that's just what's going to happen. It's just a lot of people are going to have to just start exchanging ideas and hearing people and listening to them, rather than shutting them down and immediately jumping to a conclusion that they're awful, terrible, horrible people.
Yeah, and I think, organically speaking, the way that will evolve into a more harmonious situation is literally going to be on a person-to-person level, where people, and hang on just a second.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, sorry, still trouble with the voice. But it means that people in the middle, we were talking about the polarization thing. I think I'm talking. People who are in the middle are going to have to be less apathetic and have to be more brave about the fact that they're in the middle. They're going to have to be, doing like what you're doing, holding this talk, doing your videos, saying this extremism is nutty. This is part of why I like your work, because you're very bravely saying, be mellow.
Wow, that's brave. That's scary.
Well, it is, because human beings, that there's it's a new species. It doesn't know its identity, and it has a tendency towards internal violence. I mean, on an evolutionary time scale, we haven't changed much in the last 50,000 years, but we've got all these new ways to cause trouble.
Right.
Technology has so outstripped evolution. So I think, what has to happen is you have to have a more aggressive Buddha, after a fashion, someone who will stand up and be counted as saying, no, the more fanatical thing to do is actually to be moderate, because that requires more courage than giving into your unbalance. And this isn't something that most people like to do. I mean, people take comfort in their anger. They take comfort in their fear. That's why action movies and violent sports and horror movies sell so well, because it's a way of easing the repressions. I think the real problem is you got a highly repressed society.
Yeah.
And a lot of that has to do with the history of fundamentalist, high levels of fundamentalist religion that really encourage repressed minds. To some extent, Sophia was talking about, like passionate sex. If you have a society that is so sexually repressed, that has to come out somewhere. That pressure has to come out somewhere. And the most common place for it to come out is anger.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree with you. I see where you're coming from, especially, and I like your syllogy or your analogy. I think it would be well, maybe it's not even analogy. I think your comparison. I think your comparison of that to the repression of the West is good, but I also don't really see. I don't see and I'm looking at the generation of today. I think a lot of these protesters are probably between, let's say on the Antifa side, they seem to be between the ages of 20 and 30, So I don't think that they're really influenced by religion very much. I think there's some other influence there.
Well,
I don't know exactly what that is, but I don't see them. I don't see a lot of religion pushing that side. You know, maybe on the right side, maybe I think that maybe they have a lot of influence from the Christian West.
Well, think about it this way: the right uses religion because it already has that ready excuse.
Mm-hmm.
That's all they have to appeal to. In any of their population of their followers, they can just use this same old thing. In a way, it's kind of boring. You know, it's like, oh, it's like I've said before about the NYSTV people. They're using the same scam, the same con, the same metaphors that have been used for hundreds of years. And they pick the traditional way. And so the right has this, the extreme right has this kernel of religious fundamentalist fanaticism to build on that simply hasn't gone away yet. It's going away, but it hasn't gone away. Whereas on the left, they've got a dispersion of concepts that serve the same function. And it's basically making a religion out of hating Trump or making a religion out of hating something. You know what I mean? And so it's serving the same purpose in the followers' lives. They're repressing themselves. They're repressing their own development. They're repressing the development of their own consciousness because they don't want to, because, growing is hard. Shrinking is easy, And so depending on the environment or depending on what ideas are in the environment, you can still bring out that sort of witch hunt urge in people. And since it's an irrational urge to start with, it doesn't matter what the issue is, and you will still generate violence.
Mm-hmm.
And if you have 100 causes that all have a small number of people, but every week there's another one causing trouble, then in the mass media they can sell a lot of copy talking about it, one issue at a time, 1 week at a time, which profits the fearmongers in the media. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
So it kind of comes back to creating jobs for assholes again. If it keeps the ratings up on the news, and if it keeps people thinking about something other than themselves, the way most people don't want to think about themselves and don't want to think about the repercussions of their actions and are happy to follow a leader. I mean, it's like that old psychology.
Yeah, I guess what it is I guess I have there's a hesitancy. Yeah, I'm hesitant to sort of buy into that, and I'll tell you why, Animist. I kind of it's sort of, to me it sounds kind of almost conspiracy like, believing that there's like some hands behind the scene manipulating it, whereas I could be wrong. I could be completely wrong in that point, but I don't feel that. I feel it's more of a collective group mind, a collective consciousness, mm-hmm. than I do like a single individual or a collective group of individuals behind the scenes, manipulating people. I see it more of a part of our society, our culture. That's where I see it coming from.
Yeah, no, I didn't explain. I maybe haven't explained it well, but that's totally the way I see it too. Mm-hmm. The thing is, every little pocket of antagonism has its own little activity generator. It's got its own little formula. There's no grand conspiracy to it. Mm-hmm. There's no leftist Illuminati. Right. There's just individual people who, in their individual little puddles, are finding ways to aggrandize themselves by manipulating other people. So it doesn't have to be organized if it's a general principle of behavior. If you've got a population that's, normal humans who have their own, because of their ancestral influences, I would call it, but, who have their own repressive issues, it doesn't take a vast web of conspiracy to have all this stuff pop up. It just takes people who know enough to do it on their own so it is going to be organic. And one angry person shouting on the street, one soapbox preacher can mm-hmm. maybe get enough followers to cause an incident. And if you have that running through society as a meme, as it were, then you have 10,000 soapbox preachers trying to whip people into a frenzy, and maybe only 100 of them succeed, but that's two a week, and you have an incident twice a week in the country somewhere or in the world somewhere because the population is so large. And so, yeah, it is organic. I think specifically in the leftist there are people who are professional organizers of organizations, but I don't think that's the real thing that's happening. I think it's more single issue people who manage to draw other people into their issue. They're borderline personalities. They're very angry borderline personalities.
Yeah, because especially when I see the, for example, the Antifa group, and I keep bringing up Antifa because I keep seeing them involved in these in some of these incidents. And I look at them and I see that group mentality. They all dress the same. They carry a banner. They have a label. They identify. There's a group. It's a very group mentality. Whereas some organizations, most organizations, are kind of a loose collective of individuals. That might be pockets of groups that come together around a certain issue, but they're not really quite as organized as that. Antifa seems more the group mind. So that's why I hesitate to, it concerns me just because I completely lost my train of thought.
Yeah, you got as far as the group mind.
Right.
We were agreeing that it's not the leftist Illuminati, but think about it in terms of a semi-organic process. Somebody told the police officers they were not allowed to intervene, which means,
well, yeah, but that was probably higher up. That was like, for example, what happened in Berkeley. The mayor actually told the police chief to have them stand down. They told them to not intervene. So that's what happened in Berkeley that first time.
Right.
The second time, they actually went in and they actually divided up the sides, which is what they need to do. They need to keep those two sides separate.
They were covering their ass.
Right. So the same. Okay. So
I didn't know about the second time.
Yeah. So, okay. So in Charlottesville, what happened was, okay, so there was a guy on the alt-right side, forget his name. I think it was John Kessler or Jason Kessler, who applied for a permit for Charlottesville in the park to have their Unite the Right meeting, their organization, whatever they were going to do, to also kind of stand up for the statue of General Lee that was going to be removed. And they were actually denied. They were denied it. So they actually went to the ACLU and they sued them to get the permit so that they could have the demonstration in that park, which is a federal property. So it's covered under the Constitution, freedom of speech, right to a peaceful assembly and all that. So they went through the correct motions to do that. However, the police, when they got to the park, told them that they couldn't be there. They had to leave. And they said, no, we have a permit. They said, no, it never went through. Basically, they railroaded them. They lied to them. They said, no, it's not. And so you have to go out onto the public street. So they went out onto the public street, which was in direct line with Antifa. So the police allowed that situation to happen and allowed that situation to escalate, just like in Berkeley. It's the same thing that happened in Berkeley. The police knew exactly what was going to happen if those two groups met, and they still allowed them to meet solely for the purpose of violence breaking out. So That's what's really disturbing about this whole thing. And I don't agree with the alt-right. I'm not supporting the alt-right, and I don't support Antifa. But I do see that they are encouraging violence to happen, and I don't exactly understand why they're doing that. I don't understand what would be the purpose of that.
Well, it's like I said earlier, if and clearly there is some vested interest by government officials in having this happen. It's a little bit of like bait and switching issues. Well, it's an old con game, or the bait and switch. Let me quote King James for you.
Oh no!
Just because it's the most hilarious quote that I've ever heard of. It's right up there. And this was at the time of the witch hunts in Britain. He personally was a studier of the occult, but he was also a very pragmatic politician, and he bragged in a letter. He said, "I have half of my population hunting the other half. In this, there is no chance of a popular uprising against me." This was in one of King James' letters.
Yeah,
that he was deliberately using a tactic of creating pressure release valves for the people's frustrations and angers by having them turn on each other. And it's extremely clever and pretty evil, but he did it successfully, and that meant there was no chance of a revolution. He could continue to operate however he felt, do whatever he wanted with his government, and the people would be so busy pointing fingers at each other that no one would be pointing at him. This is a known way of ruling. This is not a secret, but he was very proud of having done that. And this is something that, someone who studies political science, because that's, political science and lawyers are the people who run governments, basically. They know about this technique. They know about using it. And it doesn't require a conspiracy to do it. It's just something, it's just like if you know calculus. There's people all over the world who know calculus.
Yeah, hold on one second, Animus. Yeah, I can understand that. But, however, because we have a democracy and we already have somebody in power, I don't understand how that could be to their advantage. Whereas if you are a monarchy and a king, I can understand the power of that, because basically you don't have anybody threatening you. But we already have a person in power. We have a democracy, so you know what I mean? I can see the similarity, but there's obvious differences. But anyhow, Comedic Witch was mentioning that isn't this supposed to be Witchy Wednesday? And yeah, she's right. We kind of got sidetracked onto this, and
well, we're talking.
That's my apology, because I sort of started out this whole thing talking about changing consciousness, and I used the example of what's going on in our society right now, and so that kind of dictated the direction of the conversation. So my apologies.
Well, yeah, but I think it is relevant, because for an occultist, you need to be aware of the higher levels and the subtle subtle regions of consciousness around you. I mean, that's how your spells influence reality, right? And so just working out these patterns and seeing how certain patterns play against other patterns is literally, it's the study of, in this case, social magic. And it's a way to make your personal investigation of reality and your personal investigation of the mysteries a little more aware. And I do think we should talk about changing personal consciousness, before it's over, but just seeing the threads that go through your environment, seeing the threads and similarities that go through your society. This is an important part of magical perception, and being able to affect those threads effectively is part of your magical will.
Right. Yeah. I think that changing consciousness, I don't know if I would necessarily consider it to be a magical act. I mean, although it is part of it, I think it's more part of our collective our collective consciousness on the level of evolution. You know, I think that that's one thing that definitely, generally, most occultists would want to further and, you know, to pursue in their endeavors, is to collectively evolve, you know, mentally, you know, it's just part of that evolutionary process. I think is very important. But I think that magic, yeah, I can see the similarities, but I think that I wouldn't consider it a magical act. I think it's just more of a evolutionary process. You know, we're moving away from our animalistic nature more towards a higher consciousness sort of direction. You know, and even then there might be people who disagree with that, you know.
Well, some of that's the difference in our tradition,
Mm-hmm.
you know, because I'm an animist. So to me,
Right.
so literally, you know, animism, shamanism is all about perceiving the environment and tracking its patterns and then guiding those patterns. And so to me, it's relevant. To a ceremonial magician working with a more concrete frame of reference, it might seem less relevant. But if you're going to herd sheep, you have to learn, oh, wait, oh, yeah, oh, are they herding sheep? Oh, the government is trying to treat the people like a herd of sheep. Yeah. If you're going to herd sheep, you have to understand sheep. And once you do, you can control the movement of the flock. And then the flock itself profits you by at least not turning on you and providing you food. In the case of my comparison of King James to what's going on now, I think one of the things that is similar is that people in leadership positions do not like to have their actions questioned, and they do not like to have their secret lives investigated. And if nobody's looking, they can do what they want. They can skim the cream, whatever, you know, tap the gravy, and all of the energy that could have gone into keeping track of what your, you know, democratic leaders were doing is now gone into arguing with the neighbors across the street. I think that has been used very deliberately by politicians and religions throughout history. And it is kind of their magic after a fashion.
Yeah, but yeah, right. I understand that. But actually nowadays most of the pockets that politicians coffers are lined by is by other groups, like, you know, oil groups or military groups or bio groups, or, you know, they're funded by that. They really don't give a flying fuck what Joe and Jill are doing with their lives.
Right, but they don't want Joe and Jill to look into it. You know,
they don't. Joe and Jill are not going to look into it. I mean, they make their money by furthering their other constituents. You know, that's it. They don't have to worry about anything. What's Joe and Jill going to say? Oh, you know, Exxon Mobil's giving money to so and so. Yeah, no shit. They have been for many, many years. So what? I mean, you know what I mean? I don't see a correlation there. It's very obvious. It's very blatant.
Right.
You know?
But if everybody's busy being angry about something else, they don't all get together to get angry about that. You see what I mean? You're giving the people something to be angry about, or you're allowing the people to be angry about whatever they're angry about, because it doesn't matter. You don't have to force feed it to them by conspiracy.
Okay, so let me put it this way, Animus. Mm-hmm. What I just told you about, like, let's say Exxon Mobil lining the pockets of a particular senator to get drilling rights in a certain area. Are you surprised by that?
Oh no, not at all. That's not surprising.
Okay. Yeah, so you already know what's happening. They're not trying to confuse you or blind you by something else. It's already happening.
Right, but I'm not the angry people. You see what I mean? If everybody knows that's going on, but the angry people are busy being angry about something else, then they're not getting angry about ExxonMobil, and they're not organizing people to fight that kind of corruption. See, it distracts from the huge.
How are they going to fight them?
Well, it might affect how people vote. It might make them put in term limitations that would reduce the tendency towards corruption. But those kind of big issues never get brought up by the masses, by all the people who would otherwise be angry about that kind of corruption, because they're busy being angry about this other thing over here, their own little splinter group echo chamber. There's a certain number of angry people, and they have a place in the evolution of a society. They're the ones to go, hey, that's wrong. And if they're busy going, hey, that's wrong to have that red pedal on your bicycle, then that anger, that energy is not being put into the thing that would correct the system. That anger is not being directed towards the corruption. It's being directed towards random XYZ. And so the more angry people you have being angry at each other, that means that anger doesn't build up to a critical level in the population as a whole to take on the corruption of its leaders. And so the leaders are free to continue to be corrupt.
Okay. All right. Yeah, I disagree. I think the average voter is well aware of how stuff happens in Washington, D.C. They're well aware of how special interest groups influence senators, congressmen, and even the president of the United States. I think they're very well aware of it. And I think there's people who have done things to try and get that to change. I think that is what is happening out in our streets right now is not influenced by it. I think it's completely separate. That's just my own opinion of it. I think it is just our human consciousness. It is just our state of mind at the time. I don't think it's being influenced by anyone to distract us from what's going on in Washington, D.C. It's the same thing that's been going on in Washington, D.C. probably hundreds and hundreds of years. Somebody gets somebody in power so that they can help them make more money.
Well, yeah, that happens in all empires. The question is, at what point does it become a threat to the emperor? I don't know. It's kind of like George Orwell's 1984. Some of the way I see it. You had, you had the North America Party and the Eurasia Party and the East Asia Party, and the alliances and the arrangements of those were constantly being reported on the news, and they were constantly shifting, and it kept people in a permanent state of not realizing how much they were being oppressed by their own government, because they were constantly being told to look somewhere else, and they kept changing where they were telling people to look, so people had to keep getting reoriented.
Okay, I
kind of see it in
Sure. Let me rephrase this. Okay, comparing George Orwell's 1984. So let's say, okay, so now people's thoughts and or speech are being controlled by the government. So you go out into the street and you want to speak up and say something about the horrors of Washington, D.C. or whatever, and the police and the military kind of come along, kind of shuffle you off. They stifle your free speech. So now the government is in control of that. Same person goes up, they want to speak about whatever. Now a group of individuals come up and tell you, shut up or we're going to beat the shit out of you. Both of those people are silencing you. One is the government. The other one is a collective group of individual citizens. Mm-hmm. My point is, the group of collective individuals is the one that is going around silencing people. The government doesn't give a flying fuck. Well, they don't care. You can go out onto the street and spout whatever you want. They don't care.
Well, that's free labor.
How is it free labor?
if there are people running, if you create a culture where people run around fighting and oppressing each other, then the government doesn't have to do it. Their hands are clean. And I'm not saying it's a conspiracy. I'm saying it's a question of how much do you intervene? How much do you protect the rights?
Okay, let's be honest here. You're not saying it's a conspiracy, but it's a conspiracy. It's not UFOs, but it's UFOs.
it's people recognizing.
Do you know what a conspiracy is?
Yeah. Oh, yeah, yeah. I'm trying to explain it organically.
Okay.
If the people are, if you can everybody knows which side their bread's buttered on, you know. So you don't have to go to a meeting hall and have a deliberate plan if everybody who has a vested self-interest and an education in the process can simply recognize what's going on and let it happen, which is kind of what they're doing. They're kind of letting it happen. In which case you don't need a conspiracy. You just have to not discourage it. And I think that's where a lot of the evil is, and a lot of what you're talking about. They're just standing back. The police are standing back, or they're doing whatever they do to get these groups into the face of each other. They don't have to do it themselves. You don't have to oppress a people who are oppressing themselves. You can just sit back and let it happen, encourage it or not discourage it. But
Okay,
but they're not doing the right thing.
Okay, so it's not a conspiracy, but the government is conspiring to have it done. But it's not a conspiracy.
Because it's local. You know what I mean? If it's happening in 1,000 small places, all that has to be occurring is that local leaders are seeing that this benefits them. Tierra Anasazi, you know, I'm not saying they're doing it for their own benefit. I'm saying there's leaders see that it benefits them. And so they only have to not get in the way. If they're not enforcing your rights and someone else is trying to take your rights away, some private person, as you say, is trying to take your right away, then all they have to do is nonfeasance. All they have to do is step back and let it happen.
Yeah.
And tear itself apart.
Okay. So I agree with you in respect to local governments, like, for example, the mayor of Berkeley and the mayor of Charlottesville. Yeah, I can see that. And that's what I don't understand, is because I do see them, like having the alt-right and Antifa sort of clash. I see that. And I don't exactly understand what benefits them on a local level. But again, I guess it's just going to come down to this. I just disagree with you on the government influence. I can understand that if the government wanted to distract us from something, I could see that. But I don't see what they would be distracting us from right now, unless there's something we're just unaware of that is happening, like they found gold on the moon or something like that, you know.
Well, the whole corporations bribing Congress thing, that has failed to become a national issue for many years. Because
it's okay, maybe I'm just very aware of politics, but I think most people are aware of that. I mean, how else do you think campaign funds get into the pockets of politicians? People donate to for example, Trump. Well, Trump is a bad example because he funded most of it himself, but people give money to Trump to his campaign. They fund it. They give money to his campaign. They're like, hey, I'm really rooting for you. And by the way, when you become president, give me a call because I want to talk to you, and we'll go out to lunch together. And they go out to lunch together and they talk about all the things that this person wants to do, like they're having problems getting their permit to, there's ways that they get the ear of politicians to get influence, and it all begins with political donations. I think everybody knows this.
Yeah, I think what I'm trying to describe, and you are such a rational person, and it may actually be difficult to accept this idea. I don't know, because you are such a rational
person. Lay it
person.
on me.
Okay. For you, and you're also an occultist, and you act in accordance with your will. Most people don't do that. They have a very separate intellectual life and emotional life. We're talking about the vast majority of the population that are the flock, right? This is going to sound a little elitist, but you have trained your intellect and your will to act in accord, right? And so Most people don't do that. They don't engage in that process. And so they have all this stuff, as you say, they know is happening. Oh, I know our leaders are corrupt. Oh, we know pollution's a problem. Oh, we know there's probably global warming. But they are not sufficiently emotionally motivated to do something about it unless that motivation comes into a focus, because they do not live with their emotions in accord with their consciousness. We can maybe get into consciousness with this, but we can segue into more consciousness. And so if their emotional energy, their motivational energy is going, it's somewhere, is going random, or is going to random little issues that can never become the huge issue, you know, that will never become a national civil war creating issue. If their emotional energy is distracted by all these other little things, and the more the better, the more issues there are and the more little local places, the better it is, then they will never develop the collective motivational energy or the collective will to actually act on what they intellectually know, because most people are, you know, dissociated and repressed. And that's not the people in this channel right now, but that's just, you know, like say, you know, Jack and Jill on the street. They're distracted. And the more distracted they are, the less likely they are to act on something that they intellectually know is the true horror. You know, war, racism. You know, they're not going to try to end that, even though they know it's wrong, because they're busy being distracted by their stamp collection, or by whether bicycles should have, you know, bicyclists should have to wear safety helmets or whatever. See what I mean? Their motivational energy is dispersed, and they don't know how to focus it with their rational mind the way you do. I mean, you've trained for decades to do that. You just have to remember, most people didn't do that. And so I think that's the difference between you and most people. And recognizing that makes humanity make more sense. I mean, they're just still pretty wild and just, you know, they're wild, distracted children.
Yeah, I think okay. I hear what you're saying, and I think one of the reasons why I'm so hesitant to kind of accept that theory, and I think okay, I think to a certain extent you are correct on that. I think that could be a distraction. It could be. I think that is a possibility. However, one of the reasons why I don't want to accept it is because I'm concerned that we need to again change our consciousness as a collective group of individual consciousness.
Yeah, it's not right.
Consciousness is this.
Yeah,
and so you know that's what it is, because you see the people who we interact with throughout our daily life or at work or online or whatever is probably going one of two ways. They're probably going towards the idea that it's okay to commit violence because these people are evil. And then there's another group or another way that they could go, whereas, you know what, violence is not the answer, and maybe we need to address this in a different way. So I would want to influence those people who are sort of wondering which way to go there, to go the direction of not committing violence, letting these people do whatever stupid, you know, speeches they want to do. For example, if what had happened in Charlottesville had happened, where these group of the alt-right had gone through and had their little tiki torch parade, and then had their speech, and then packed it all up and went home, there would be one woman alive today that is not alive today. And that woman's name is Heather, and I can't remember her last name. She would be alive at this point. So now, is that the fault of Antifa? Is it the fault of the guy who... It's actually the fault of the guy who hit her with the car.
Yep.
But all these other actions did have an influence on this. So, you know, I mean, that's kind of where I want to focus the understanding consciousness, as in, fuck whatever, who cares what the government's doing? They're going to be doing this no matter what. But as a collective, uh, as a nation, we need to stop buying into this primitive mindset that somehow punching a Nazi is going to solve this problem, because it's not. The only thing that is going to happen is there's going to be more vandalism, there's going to be more destruction, there's going to be more violence, and there's going to be more death. Period. You know what I mean?
Yeah, no, and you're completely right. And that evolution needs to happen. And I think it's going to happen on mostly on an individual level. And I think it has been happening. I mean, considering what used to happen in South Carolina in terms of, you know,
if you go back more than 50 years.
Yeah. So, I mean, we have come a certain way. But I agree with you that that's the direction it needs to go. And it's going to take a lot of personal effort on the part of a lot of individual people in situations like this, doing work like yours or doing what I do with people. But to some extent, it's a bit of a snowball effect. And right now, the snowball has grown to a certain extent. You know, the idea of enlightenment, the idea of, you know, instead of going to a KKK meeting, people go to a yoga class, and that this is prevalent throughout society. I think that's a sign that progress has been made. I mean, even the fact that people would protest a war is a sign that progress has been made. You know, I mean, when we were kids, they were protesting the Vietnam War.
Yeah, but
nobody protested World War II. Nobody protested World War I. You know what I mean? So we've made some progress, but you're right. We have a long way to go, and it's going to have to go, you know, step by step, ripple by ripple.
Yeah, but for example, the Vietnam War. Okay, so yes, the people who protested the Vietnam War, that's different. I mean, I know it's the same, it's a protest, but it's actually different because there's no war that this group was protesting. They were actually just protesting to have, you know, the General Lee statue, you know, to not be removed, but chances are it was going to be removed anyhow. But they wanted to bring attention to it. So that's what I'm talking about, is this idea that somehow violence is going to have a positive influence, and I don't see violence having any positive influence whatsoever.
No, I agree with that.
You know,
well, I mean, not in the sense of people throwing rocks at each other anyway. Nope, sorry, I started to drop back down into my world again. You know, mining is a form of violence, but it's how you make space rockets. But that's way too generic a version of the word violence.
Oh, I thought you said throwing rocks.
Yeah, I got my little things tripped over each other. Just forget that minute.
Okay.
You know, I come from a little bit of a partially a hunter-gatherer background. And so...
No, you don't. You went to Safeway and bought your food.
Oh, I did lately. But you know, because I discovered how much easier it was to hunter-gatherer in the grocery store. But when I was a kid.
The extent that we're hunters and gatherers now is we either go to Ralph's or we go to Safeway. That's the extent of our hunter and gatherer society.
Oh, not as a society. You know, I come from a weird little strain of society. But no, when I was a kid, I was allowed a certain amount of food at the table and a certain amount of time to eat it, and then I was expected to go out and use my skills to collect food from the environment with to make up whatever the difference was. That was part of the lessons.
Okay.
You know, because you know, this is country culture. You know, you teach the kids to fish, to hunt, to gather berries and stuff, and that's all a form of violence. But that's way too generic a form of violence. You know, that's necessary survival skills. That's not, you know, protesters hitting each other with rocks. I sort of wandered down that path when you. No, there are still people out there who raise their kids that way. No, I agree, and I think we are seeing the changeover times where people don't just applaud the violence. You know, you're on here, I'm on here, we're saying this is wrong. This is not an effective way of communicating with each other, and that it's possible to say, you know, that guy over there who's shouting about how angry he is, he's nuts. He's crazy.
Mm-hmm.
And don't do what he says. Don't join that cult. Don't go down that road. Which traditionally humans just formed a mob and went out and slaughtered each other, just cause, you know. And now at least, you know, people in the, like us here in this channel, you know, we're saying no, this is actually wrong. It's actually wrong, and not just wrong that, not just what happened was wrong, but it's wrong in principle. And that's kind of a new, that's not something that humanity has been good at saying.
Right.
You know?
Yeah, because okay. I understand the fears that people have about that. They believe that, you know, people are allowed to spout hate speech, that other people are going to be influenced and say, hey, you know, I kind of feel that way too, and I'll join that group. I don't really buy into that. I feel that there's good ideas in this world, and then there's bad ideas. And if you get up in front of a group of people and you spout a bad idea, people are just, they're not going to buy into it. You know, they're just going to walk away, just go, wow, that guy's an idiot, and that's it. You know, you'll never hear from them again. And that's just the way it is. There's good ideas in this world, and then there's bad ideas in this world. Sometimes you have somebody who really speaks quite eloquently and has a lot of charisma and has a really bad idea that they can sell to somebody else, but it's pretty rare. And even so, if you, let's say they did get more numbers up, I mean, then you can start worrying about them. Then you can actually start making plans to, you know, to combat them somehow, you know, mostly just by enforcing the laws that we already have, certain civil rights and civil liberties that are inherent. But as for somebody getting up there and spouting a bad idea, all you got to do is just listen to them and just hear what they're saying, and you go, wow, that's a really bad idea. You know,
yeah,
it kind of kill.
A lot of people don't have the critical facilities that you have for making that determination. I think that's what we have to encourage.
I think you're giving me way too much credit, and you're not giving other people that credit. I think the majority of the people out there are pretty intelligent, you know, and there's a lot of stupid people, but there's a lot of intelligent people too, you know. Oh, you still there?
Yeah, I'm still here. I was just remembering P.T. Barnum.
Oh, okay.
What did he say? No one ever went broke underestimating the good taste and intelligence of the American public.
Right.
Yeah, I've done a lot of work in places where people, you know, and it may be our experience that's different, but I've done like security work in public places, and people are pretty bestial in a lot of situations, or they are if they can get away with it and get a rush out of it, you know. And so it could be that our experience of humanity is just different because I've worked with people who were not at their best quite a bit, whereas you may have had the luxury of working with people who were trying to be at their best, at least trying to be on good behavior. And that's, you know, that's just a personal perspective. You know.
Okay. Okay. So, all right. So we could play out both of these scenarios. I think that if you allow somebody to stand up in front of a General Lee statue and spout whatever hateful nonsense they want to spout, and you just allow them to do it, other people around them are not going to buy into it, and they're just going to ignore it. So you, on the other hand, how do you feel about that situation? You feel that people are going to flock to them and join their cause and say, oh yeah, I hate people too?
Well, I think a certain amount of them will, for their own reasons or repressions or, you know, whatever. But when you have a large enough population, the number of people that, even if it's a small percentage, even if most people are basically nice, but you have a really large population, which we have, 300 million people in this country, then it's not that hard for enough nutters to get together to cause an incident. And I think that's some of what we're seeing. I think you're right. Most people are basically decent. They're just trying to live their life. and they're only nasty when their personal issues come up. But when you have a city of 12 million, or a metropolitan area of 12 million, if 1/10 of 1% of them act up, you have a huge civic disaster.
So let me ask you that. So let me ask you this, Animus. In the political climate that we've had, like, let's say the past 10 years, did you even hear about anything called the alt-right 6 years ago, 5 years ago?
Oh, I hadn't heard of the alt-right until you said it.
Okay.
So you're definitely more in tune.
A lot of this group that we have recently been seeing in the past couple of years, there's a reason why suddenly in the past couple of years their numbers have been growing and they're popping up in the news. These people that have this sort of mindset have been around for a very, very long time. There's a reason why suddenly now they're popping up. And it's not because they've been able to speak freely in front of a statue and gain followers. No, they're in reaction to something. And that's what I'm saying. So I can understand your point of view that you feel that if people are allowed to speak, that somehow they're going to get members. I disagree. I think that if people speak and they spout whatever nonsense, people are just going to move on. They're not going to join them. They're not going to do it because they don't have any reason to. There's no benefit. There's nothing, there's nothing that they identify with. There's nothing that makes them identify with somebody else. If anything, we have more in our culture for them not to identify with them and to actually be repulsed by them, and to think that these people wanting this sort of ethno-state or whatever is completely absurd and ridiculous. The only reason why they become stronger is because there's this push on the left side and this sort of anti-white sentiment that has been allowed to perpetuate and mix in, and people are starting to get frustrated with it. And suddenly now this alt-right group is now looking pretty good. So that's how I view it. I don't think
understood your issue. I'm definitely in favor of letting the nutter stand on his soapbox and shout.
Mm-hmm.
That's not, you have to do that. You have to let the nutter shout. If he's, if he gets to the point of creating a public nuisance, then maybe you have to take him to the home and get him back to his counselor and get his medications going on. But no, I totally agree. You have that legally, civically. If the guy's going to stand on his soapbox on the corner, maybe you have to kind of look around and see if he's developing a following, to see if there's some potential threat to the peace going on there, in which case it ceases to be peaceful assembly. But I totally agree that the friction is the problem. But I think there are a lot of people who love friction and look for it, and they look for they're angry and they're looking for an excuse to be more angry. And so that is just a state of evolution. I'm not saying that anything should be done legislatively about that. We just have to recognize that that is there. And so I totally agree with your position that the problem is that when you slap these two sets of nutters together and let them wreak havoc, then that's irresponsible. That's society being irresponsible, or its governance being malfeasant. And I've noticed in some cases it's deliberate.
Yeah, well, I mean, so yeah, I mean, I think that you can have two groups who are opposed to each other, and yeah, I can understand that. There's the wonderful thing about the Constitution is it allows the protesters, but it also allows the counter protesters. So both sides has the right to speak their minds. It's just when violence breaks out, and they need to keep those groups separate. And like somebody was mentioning in the chat earlier, like they have shields and helmets and sticks, and it's like it's just going to keep escalating. People are going to bring explosives. They've already brought explosives. They're going to bring weapons. They're actually already bringing weapons, but it's going to escalate to a point where somebody's going to bring a gun, you know, in maybe a state that they don't allow open carry. And maybe they'll use that gun, probably not, you know, out in the open, but they might use it on the side afterwards or whatever. So, I mean, just allowing that level of violence to escalate is very dangerous. So, you know, that's really what I wanted to point out, and it's just to really put it into people's consciousness to move away from this violence. However, you feel comfortable in doing that, you know, in conversations or whatever. But I think that that's what we need to do.
Yeah, I think it is something where it's going to be people encouraging other people to stand up against the madness, as it were.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I think that's, you know, like I said, that's why I think your work is important, because that's, you know, that's a lot of what you do, other than being incredibly entertaining with wonderful, you know, editing. You're doing that. You're encouraging people who otherwise might not stand up and say, "Hey, you're a nutter." You know, that guy's not inspired. He's just a nutter. You know, and you're encouraging that. And so I applaud that. And we definitely need more people to do that, because the tendency for non-nutters is to kind of want to turn away and not get involved. You know, but we need people to turn towards it and get involved. And it's something I've done. That's something I've done quite a bit of. You know, I've been in places where there was someone trying to pick on gay people or trying to harass women, and because of my background and my training and my general nature, you know, I have no problem with stepping into that situation and saying, "Hey, that behavior is inappropriate," and basically one way or another making them stop that behavior. But you know, we need more people to have that kind of boldness to say, no, this whole process is wrong. I think you have to, well, that's kind of what you're doing. You're encouraging people to say, no, the violence is wrong. The craziness is wrong, whichever side it's from. And putting the two crazies together who are going to set each other off is definitely irresponsible governance. When I was a kid, let me tell you a story. When I was a kid, the KKK used to run a KKK march through Skokie, Illinois, which was a highly Jewish community and had tons of Holocaust survivors in it, because, you know, I'm not old. And because they had the right to peaceably assemble and hold their march, the town of Skokie, which is a suburb of Chicago, would give them the permit to hold their little march, but they would run them down some nowhere back side street. They would only give them a permit to be in a certain place or down certain streets. And so they could hold their march for themselves while everyone else ignored them. And I think that was responsible. That was a responsible way for their free speech to be respected without causing humongous violence. And I think what you're seeing in Berkeley and Charlottesville, the ones you're talking about, is someone who is failing to be responsible and keeping these antagonistic points of view far enough away to ignore each other until one of them went home.
Yeah. I mean, I mean, it is that, but it's also, I think, it's, it's the situation of the projection onto other people.
Yeah, that's a mental sickness.
It's the projection onto other people to see them as some kind of an evil entity or something that needs to be destroyed. That's at the heart of it.
Right.
But also connected to that is the fact that, you know, these groups, if they're allowed to come together, violence is just going to happen. So if you are going to have counter protests at these things, then the counter protests need to be separated from the main protests. Otherwise, it's just going to escalate and turn into violence, you know. And the people who are, committing the violence, they're projecting onto these other people, and that's why they're committing violence, you know. But anyhow, it's already 7:47. I only meant to go for an hour.
Oh, you say that every time.
I know. Well, I mean, I kind of felt bad this time because Comedic Witch was right. It was supposed to be kind of like a Witchy Wednesday, and we turned it into a political conversation.
Well, I think just a real quick thing. I think part of the commission of the witch in general, the wise ones, the cunning ones of the old days, those people were involved in the social order of their day. They were advising chiefs. They were advising the chieftains. They were influencing their society. So I think those issues are entirely relevant. Sometimes for for witches. This may not be your favorite part of your practice, but I think that is part of the tradition.
Actually, the covens that the most recent coven I was in was actually that was actually a no. You actually don't want to talk about politics because it creates division. So I mean, I think individually, obviously, we all have our own sort of political agenda that we can all, however we feel necessary to work for that. But
I meant on a personal level, because witches definitely work their personal angles, to put it mildly.
But I think that it's I guess so. But I also feel that there's a certain responsibility. I don't know. I mean, this is going to get really esoteric at this point. I think that we have a much greater responsibility, as in to look at a whole span of human history. I mean, we get focused in on our little timeline and what's happening right now. But if you look at the expansion of history, all the stuff, all the things that have happened, all the kings that have rose and fallen, and all the societies that have risen and fallen, and all the various things that have happened. I mean, I think it's important to maybe see patterns to understand how certain things might happen, and be aware of that. But in the long run, sometimes the best thing to do is just to let things happen, because rather than try to influence it, because it's just, sometimes you just have to let shit happen.
Yeah, you have to pick your spots where the system can be manipulated into a better shape. And I think it's good that you don't have your personal agendas or politics brought out during a coven meeting, because when you're doing that, that's when you're just being your tradition, where you're in the pure form. When you're there, you're being witches. You're doing the things that connect you to the world as a tradition. But then when you're off doing your personal work, you can support or undercut or manipulate in whatever way you think would be better for reality. But I totally agree with the not having political debates within a coven, because no matter what happens, that's going to end up being divisive.
Yeah, and I mean, it's also, I think it would be really hard to get a anyhow, I just I don't like that sort of collective mentality. I think we all may share similar political ideologies, but I think like when people got into this binding Trump thing, it's like, that's another aspect where it's just kind of like, no, just don't do that, don't do that,
Yeah, I don't know if it was you, but somebody around this channel said, didn't you just invalidate the entire spell by announcing it up front?
Right.
I thought that was a brilliant analysis. You just created a null spell. You just uncast a spell.
Yeah, well, it was also just so stupid, because it was like a binding, but it was also a curse, and it didn't really make any sense. I mean, it was really half-assed slapped together, and I think that it was more of a political move. I think that there were like political witches who thought this would be a great idea, and so they sort of put it together and then spread it around. And that's why, because it wasn't really thought out. Speaking
clearly they were more politicians than occultists, because
right.
They obviously did not understand the nature of occult workings.
Right. It's kind of like bringing it back to changing consciousness. You would not want to bind or curse Trump, but if you really wanted to influence political direction, you would want to change Trump's consciousness. That's what you would want to do. You wouldn't want to bind him because that doesn't make any sense. It's
that's just creating more meaningless friction that would bleed your energy off.
Yeah, and then it wasn't even a bind. I don't know, whatever. It was just such a stupid thing. But anyhow,
it was a good example of a bad example in how to change consciousness.
Right.
Clearly, because instead of kind of like what I started with, the way you change consciousness is becoming part of the system and being involved in the system in a productive way, and then you can direct the system. And the people who do that have some influence over the system. People who just come throw rocks into the garden don't end up with much of a harvest.
Right, and I think that people get they limit themselves by believing that everything has to be fixed by certain types of magical work, and they really need to free themselves up and realize that really it's limitless, the possibilities that you can use to your advantage, but using the best way to accomplish a goal is the best way to do it. The joke that if you view all problems as a screwdriver, then or what is it? It's
if all you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail.
Yeah, there you go. Thank you. Exactly. And I think that that's how people view things. It's like, oh, well, let's see. I could do a binding, or I could do a curse, or I could do a witch's bottle or whatever. I mean, they begin to limit themselves to there's only a couple of things that you can do, and it's like, no, you can do anything. There's no limitation. You can do anything, and do it the most effective for whatever it is you want to accomplish.
Right. I mean, that is why it's a cult. It is the subtle and hidden things to some extent. Now, Kemetic said doctrine of signatures, and I don't know what that is, so I'm not sure what you're getting.
Doctrine of signatures says anything is a correspondence. Yeah, I don't know what that is either. Doctrine of signatures? But yeah, I mean, anything can be a correspondence. But yeah, I also sort of tend to disagree with that. I'm not into this anything goes thing. I think that there has to be again, that's just the way that I think. There has to be certain rhyme and reason for everything that you use in a particular influence, certain correspondence, because if not, then it just becomes chaotic energy and nothing happens. There has to be, huh?
She says it's from hoodoo, and that's a system that we don't know how that system is diced up. So we're both a little bit out of the loop on that. Oh, okay. Okay, it's comparing the physical manifestation with the spiritual relationships. And so anything could be a path into the world, into the realm where you can find other influences.
Yeah, well, I mean, that makes sense because
we just don't know hoodoo.
Yeah, well, I mean, that makes sense because it's like the Hermetic principle of as above, so below. It's kind of like, if however something functions in the mundane world can also function that way in the spiritual world. Yeah, I can understand.
Hey, we learned a trick.
Right. Yeah, because it's kind of like certain stones of certain colors have certain influences, or you can associate those with certain things. Yeah, I mean, I agree with that, because if you don't have any way to ground it and it's just anything goes, it's chaotic. Nothing happens. But anyhow, so I'm going to wrap this up. Sorry, folks, that we got off onto a political discussion. Sorry about that. Yeah, I just wanted to talk about changing consciousness, and I kind of got sidetracked onto the whole, political thing.
It's what's on your mind, so it's worth putting it in the environment to some extent. And I think it was productive. Yeah. And we could always revisit the same idea and agree to just do it in an esoteric way, at another time or as a part of another time.
Right. Yeah, I mean, or next Wednesday, if you wanted to bring up a topic, we could do
You know,
that too.
we could talk about, you know, at some point, if we're not beating a dead horse, we could talk about the uses of, I don't know, meditation or the consciousness, how, you know, how ancestral consciousness plays in affecting our lives or something like that. I can always talk about things like that. Like I said,
Okay.
emergent and altering consciousness is a big part of my practice. So
Okay.
if you think it would be fun, we could go there again.
Yeah, I mean, I think I think it'd be. I don't think we have. I mean, we touched on ancestrals, but we didn't really talk about meditation. So, yeah, we could definitely revisit that. You know, that's not a problem. So we'll talk about that next Wednesday. Meditation and ancestral spirits.
Yeah, sure.
Okay.
See where it leads us, because there's a lot of people in this channel who have a lot of good insight into that kind of thing. You got some existentialists, you got some, you know, heathens who are into their ancestry, and we got Kemetic does hoodoo, and there's a lot of that in there. So, yeah, I think that could be fun to explore.
Yeah. I mean, I'll probably pretty much just sit there and listen because
once in a while you should get to be the tourist and just soak up everybody else's ideas.
I mean, it's okay. I mean, I don't mind thinking about it some more, but I mean, I've already explored that path and I came back to where I was. But, you know, hey, I don't know everything, you know, and I think that there's a lot of good information out there. So, so alrighty. Thank you all, Animus. Thank you so much. I also made you a moderator. So if you see so that if you ever want to post links or anything in there, you can. And all right. Thanks.
Okay. Thanks for having me on, man. It's always a pleasure.
Yes. Thank you so much, Animus. It's always a joy talking with you. Thank you so much.
All right. You have a good night to everybody.
All right. Good night. Good night, chat. Bye-bye.